How's it going, everyone? Welcome to week 3 here. Moving right along in the form of civilizations. We talked to Mesopotamia last week. Kind of laid out some features of civilization and how those are exhibited in the Mesopotamian context. And now that we have sort of in our toolkit, our historian's toolkit, an idea of what civilization is in complex society, we can extract those and bring that with us when we look at other parts of the world. In this case, we're looking at Egypt. That's our topic for this week, which again, I think maybe people are a little more familiar with Egypt than Mesopotamia. Probably a little more. I mean, there's a lot more movies, like The Mummy is about Egypt. Maybe a little more of the pharaohs or gods or all sorts of things that maybe are Egypt. Pyramids, obviously, are important. This lecture just kind of lays those out, kind of gives a little context of what Egypt is, what it's about, its society, culture, history. So hopefully after this week, you'll have a better idea of what is Egypt. And it's a civilization. And what is nice about Egypt is it's our first, from the historical perspective, gives us a way to compare and contrast. That we have Mesopotamia, we've talked about that, how it was formed. So what is similar between Mesopotamia and Egypt, right? Kind of what I talk about in a little bit of the lecture. I mean, one, right off the bat, they both have rivers. Mesopotamia has 2 rivers, right? The middle of the rivers, Tigris, Euphrates. Whereas the Nile is the major river of Egypt. And the Nile is very unique. It's the longest river in the world. It flows north, but the winds blow south, so it's easier to traverse. The sort of seasonal flooding of the Nile is very different than Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia had to really do a lot of irrigation, sort of manage the water, where the Nile floods every year. So you just wait for it to flood. You kind of hang out, wait for the waters to recede. Brings all this nutrients. You just grow your food on there. You don't have to worry about like replenishing things. Grow your food, harvest it, and then you just wait around for the floods to come again. And in those periods of waiting, what do? You build things like temples and pyramids, all of those stuff. So, and I talked about the pyramids there, and the history of the pyramids. That's really kind of the beginning phase of Egyptian history. And in fact, Cleopatra, who is later actually a Greek a pharaoh, queen of Egypt, is closer in time to today than she is to the construction of the pyramids. So just to kind of give you a sense of that. So they were really long ago, 2500 BCE, the pyramids and the Sphinx by Khufu and Khafre. So that's the old period. Egypt, there's 18 dynasties, 2,500 years of history there. You don't have to memorize all of that stuff. In fact, please don't, unless you want to be an Egyptologist, but then you can go to school for a long time to learn about all those. Just kind of the old, middle, new. Old is where things come together, the coalescence of the Nile. Middle is kind of the one of the high points of literature. Then another compare and contrast. Both Mesopotamia and Egypt had developed a sense of writing, though they're very, very different. The cuneiform is very different from the hieroglyphs. I talk about hieroglyphs, and then there's another language, Metoric, which is sort of a simplified hieroglyphs. And the reason we can get all this from the Rosetta Stone, which had all the Greek, which people could read. They could then translate the Meroitic, using sort of cognates, words for kings and things, pull that things apart, names you can kind of figure out. And then from there, we're able to decipher hieroglyphs and put it all together. And so between the writing, a lot of writing, and the fact that it's a desert, things are preserved, we know a lot about Egypt. About Egypt's society, which I talk about, social hierarchies, religion, which again is another interesting compare and contrast. Both obviously Mesopotamia and Egypt has religions, but they have their own gods, Ishtar and these sort of city gods. The Mesopotamian context, Egyptian context, right? They have a whole another host of gods. I gave a video of Isis and Osiris that you can watch. Please do. I think it's pretty interesting. They're the ones that are kind of like a main god. The sun god, obviously, in the desert, Ra is important. The concept of afterlife is very unique to Egypt. That you have this society of reeds, this world of reeds, the afterlife that humans go to, that our physical life is only half of our world. There's a whole other afterlife that we can go to, and the way you get there, right, is you need to be good. Your heart needs to balance the scale. Measured by Anubis, the jackal-headed god. And if you do, you go to the Aratu, I think it is, the city of reeds, right? You want order. You want stability, mat, and this kind of this order and harmony within society. You fulfill your duties and do good things to the pharaoh, who's also a god. For your fellow Egyptians, for the gods, you go to the afterlife. You can get mummified, take your body with you, and some other good things that you want to put in there for the afterlife. Yeah, so that's a very, very unique element of Egyptian religion. Then the other part, the video that we talked about, another video I want you to look at today is Akhenaten. There's thousands of pharaohs of Egypt. Akhenaten's a very interesting one, so look over that video as well. It's a documentary. At least if anybody 5 years from now says, "Name me a Egyptian pharaoh," you can be like, Akhenaten, right? I mentioned a few other ones, but Akhenaten's a good one. And so that's kind of Egypt. And then I also talk about Nubia, which is south of Egypt, but also along the Nile, which is a very distinctive kingdom and culture to itself. Borrows some from Egypt, but also has its own gods and kings and architecture, and kind of connects sub-Saharan Africa with Egypt in these larger trade networks. And then sub-Saharan Africa, talk about that, like Bantu migrations. So kind of gives you an idea of Egypt is part of Africa, but it's also very part of the Mediterranean world. Nubia is connected to that, and sub-Saharan Africa gets brought into that via these other larger trade networks. So that's it. I looked over your discussion post 1. Good job. Again, just make sure that stuff's in your own words. I think people did a good job of it. Make sure you refer to the course materials. That's the easiest way for me to, these discussion posts are meant to be, what did you learn? So show me what you learned from the course materials that we discussed is the best way to go about it. It doesn't have to be verbatim. I do want it in your own words, but you can reference. People did a good job of referencing some of the main points that we discussed. So do that again this week. Again, another discussion post. There's 3 of them. Choose one. Either compare and contrast Mesopotamia and Egypt, or look at Akhenaten, the video, a little more. Or third one's a little more open-ended. You can kind of do a little bit of research if you want on your own figure, which is great. It's encouraged. Research is good. But the one thing I want you to do is make sure you explain what source you're using for it. Don't just cite the source, but tell me why you think this source is credible. I mean, one part of thinking historically is where are we getting our information from? So not only explain who this person is, if it's a god or a historical figure, or again, I maybe should add to that too, if you want to, a place, if you want to look at a temple as well. But if you just want to do a god or a historical figure, that's fine. But in your explanation, please talk about, this is the source I use, this is why it's good, this is why it's credible. That's one part of historical thinking. I want people to start engaging with their sources. Where are you getting this information from? Where are they getting their information from? That's it. Enjoy the rest of your week.